So now I want to hand over to Tom Burgoyne, who has been working with the Information Management Framework team, and will talk us through the practical considerations for the work that they did at Anglian Water to move this prototype forward. Tom, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thanks, Kirsten. Yes, so next slide, please. So yeah, my name is Tom Burgoyne. I'm the technical lead from Anglian Water for the CReDo project, and I actually work across the carbon neutrality and enterprise data teams. The CReDo project is really quite appealing to me because it kind of hits that sweet spot because it's a climate-centric use case built on flexible and scalable data architecture. So like many organisations, Anglian Water is going through a digital transformation and has been for a number of years. What I have on the slide here is actually an illustration of the digital twin roadmap that we developed in 2019. Don't worry too much about the icons in terms of their sequencing. It's kind of showing an increasing capability as it advances through to 2035. I also put on the slide here the net zero carbon roadmap. We have a strategy to get to net zero carbon by 2030. And I'm absolutely convinced that having an internal Anglian Water digital twin will actually facilitate achieving that goal, and indeed having a national digital twin would be even more powerful. But you may notice that 2030 and 2035, the dates don't quite line up. So one of the things we are hoping to achieve with the CReDo project is to be able to accelerate our building of the digital twin. So my background's actually in energy optimization. So I've been developing kind of tools and applications over the years, which has meant that even within a water industry, I've been having to pull together fused data between energy and water and indeed IoT devices, all to kind of help us with our efficiency monitoring and visualization. When you're working in this kind of environment, you're going to be quite focused on a specific use case, and actually you can develop something which can be quite powerful. But ultimately, the final product may achieve that particular use case, but we do find sometimes they're not so able to integrate more widely across the estate. So this actually led us to kind of thinking about how to tackle this particular issue. And colleagues and myself have been looking at an approach called Trellis, which is time-bound resource-linked systems. It's trying to leverage a physical systems thinking approach to give more consistency and clarity about our asset base. And we shared this with the IMF team and actually found there was quite an uncanny alignment with the IMF approach itself. But one of the key distinctions here is Trellis was more of a theory, whereas the IMF were actually bringing tools and a method for implementing that in a business context. Next slide, please. So looking now to the CReDo data request itself, there's kind of two key work streams being mentioned, the digital twin visualization led by CMCL and the actual foundations led by the IMF team. So we had to prepare the data request arguably to serve both of these purposes. So in the first instance, CMCL, absolutely they needed to get on with the work. We talked about this only taking a few months. And so we had to take a slightly more traditional and pragmatic approach to actually pulling that data together. Anglian Water, like many organisations, has kind of organically grown over the years, and we have a federated estate of master data applications. So we had data held in our SAP, which is our ERP system, in G-Water, which is our GIS system, in Iris, which is our telemetry system, as well as SQL databases and Excel sheets even as well. So the data was scattered across the enterprise. And so I had to pull all this data. It kind of fell to me to pull all this data together. But one of the interesting features of this is that the data license, so the legal obligations that we were adhering to, a nod towards the open data challenges that we have been referenced earlier, that required us to provide data in a geospatial area. Now, that's easy enough from your GIS system, but actually when you start looking at your other systems, it's actually not quite as immediately obvious. So what you actually need to do is combine those data sets to make sure that you're adhering to the data license. So you actually have to make the data interoperable before handing it over. And Tom Collingwood referenced that in his slides ahead. Lots of data wrangling done there. And that actually then presents an opportunity to do some cross-verification as well, to actually see how the data sets actually line up and actually try and make them slightly more consistent to then hand to CMCL so they could really hit the ground running with building their knowledge graph. So this achieved both the tactical goal of getting that data to CMCL, but it also presented a comparison for the more measured approach that the IMF would be adopting. So could you go to the next slide, please? So in parallel, Anglian Water was able to commit to working with the IMF team and looking at various kind of thin slices, which Matthew just referenced a moment ago. So we selected our first thin slice out of the same data set that we're referring to here. We chose that to be the SAP function location because it's a very powerful and detailed piece of information that Anglian Water used for identifying our assets. It has various kind of classification information held within there as well, and it's importantly used all over the place. So it's not just held in SAP, or not just used in SAP, it's actually used across the entire estate. And so we brought to bear the IMF approach on this thin slice. So it starts with data quality and ends with data quality. So the first step is to actually look within the thin slice and make sure that we're improving the data quality such that when we mine the data out of that thin slice, it's actually more meaningful, more useful. If you then take the resulting information and you build a data model grounded in the Burrow top level ontology, that's really trying to move towards that common language, that more interoperable way of describing that particular thin slice's data. But the really interesting things start happening when you actually move to the next thin slice, where you repeat the process that I've just talked through of data quality, data mining, and then building the model. Because when you actually come to merge these two things together, it's kind of similar to how I did it in a manual way before, but you start getting to see the differences and the discrepancies between these data sets. And with each merge of the model, the data becomes richer and closer to reality. But importantly, it's done so in a reusable and more automated way, which means that we get to do this more effectively in the future rather than in the kind of bespoke way that I have to do it in the pragmatic approach. And this really starts hitting some of the key principles we're looking for in terms of the digital reflecting the physical and really searching for that one version of the truth. So next slide, please. So we had a really positive experience working with the IMF team. Absolutely, we were learning the entire way through this process and trying to take that learning and embed it into Anglian Water. Obviously, we've taken the trellis idea itself, and that's now been clearly enhanced by the IMF approach, and we're using that information and that learning to inform the migration to our SAP for HANA products. So we're going through that migration at the moment. We also shared the data quality techniques that were identified with our asset intelligence team. So we're improving the data in our core systems. And importantly, and what this slide is alluding to here, is we gained funding for a number of projects through the Ofwat Innovation Fund. And I'm calling out the one in the centre most specifically, which is Safe Smart Systems. And that actually had the IMF listed as one of the foundational pillars of how we're going to approach that particular project, which is looking at making a more automated water network of the future, and is actually going to be across the entire water industry, even though it's led out of Anglian Water and a team. But obviously, really looking forward to participating in CReDo as it moves forwards. And I want to thank you for your time listening today. Thank you very much. Back to you, Kirsten.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, it's brilliant to see all this coming together. I can tell that this webinar itself is going to be a brilliant resource for people wanting to pick this work up.